The Scriptures say the lives of believers will provoke Jews to anger and jealousy. So, does your life do that? This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. Let's talk about it. Anger and jealousy. Those are two very strong words packed with emotion. So, when a Jew looks at your life of faith, are they filled with anger and jealousy? If not, why not? God, Yahweh himself, said he would provoke his people by way of showing the nations of the world his Torah and lead them to follow it. In doing so, it would create a hatred and jealousy within his people. So, if your life doesn't create a jealousy within modern Jews, you need to examine your life to see if you're walking the biblical life of a true believer. Let's dig into it. Over the years, I've seen where Jews have gotten angry because many believers in Yeshua are now pursuing the Torah. Many of these Jews are quick to say the Torah is only for them. But that's not what Yahweh said. Consider Numbers chapter 15, starting in verse 14. For the generations to come, whenever an alien or anyone else living among you presents an offering made by fire as an aroma pleasing to Yahweh, he must do exactly as you do. The community is to have the same rules for you and for the alien living among you. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the alien shall be the same before Yahweh. The same laws and regulations will apply both to you and the alien living among you. You and the alien shall be the same before Yahweh. So, Yahweh said there is to be one law for the Hebrews, all 12 tribes, and for the alien just the same. And he didn't say the alien has to go through some ritual or process to be a part either. If they have chosen to walk in obedience to the word of Yahweh, they are to be treated as equals according to Yahweh. Thus, we're to be grafted into biblical Israel, as Paul explained here in Romans chapter 11. We are grafted in through faith, and then we're expected to walk in the obedience of that faith. But again, back in Numbers chapter 15, Moses made it clear when he said, "You and the alien shall be the same before Yahweh," and the same law applies to both. However, there are many Jews today who get mad when they see anyone who is not of Jewish descent or converted pursue the Torah, be it by keeping the Sabbath, the feast days, the dietary instructions, and especially wearing tzitzit. Some have tried to dissuade people from following the Torah. They'll say how Gentiles don't have to follow the Torah and how God provided the Noahide laws for the Gentiles. But when it comes to the Torah, they say that's only for the Jews. But Numbers 15 shows that's not true. But this mentality among many Jews today regarding others pursuing the Torah was among the Jews in the first century just as much as it's alive today. That's why we read this in Acts 22. It's where Paul was making his defense before the Jews. Acts 22, starting in verse 21. Then the Lord said to me, "Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles." The crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, "Rid the earth of him. He's not fit to live." The moment Paul mentioned he was sent to reach the Gentiles, the Jews were enraged and said, "Rid the earth of him. He's not fit to live." Why? Because they knew that meant he was preaching the Torah to the Gentiles, something they believed was only for them. And it's the same today. Many are jealous for the Torah to be only for them. So, when they see a Gentile pursuing the Torah, an anger and jealousy rises within them. This jealousy is something Paul discusses in Romans chapter 10 and 11. Romans 10:19. Again, I ask, did Israel not understand? First, Moses says, I will make you envious by those who are not a nation. I will make you angry by a nation that has no understanding. Paul is quoting Deuteronomy chapter 32, where Yahweh was declaring this was going to happen. And we see it happening today. People who had no understanding of the Torah is coming to the Torah because Yahweh is opening their eyes to see it and to grow in it. Look what Paul says in the next verse, verse 20. And Isaiah boldly says, I was found by those who did not seek me. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. But concerning Israel, he says, all day long I have held out my hands to a disobedient and obstinate people. Wow, those are harsh words from Yahweh. Yahweh wants his people to follow his instructions, and his instructions only, not the teachings and traditions of men. Look what Paul said in chapter 11. Verse 11 says, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. But rather, through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles, for to provoke them to jealousy. We see from these verses that the church is to provoke the Jews to jealousy by walking in the ways of his Torah, to make them jealous because of how they see us living, that being in accordance to the Torah. This is what Yahweh said would happen. To really understand this, let's read the whole verse Paul is quoting from. Deuteronomy chapter 32, starting in verse 21. They made me jealous by what is no God, and angered me with their worthless idols. I will make them envious by those who are not a people. I will make them angry by a nation that has no understanding. So they made Yahweh jealous by serving other, quote, gods and idols. But that's not the only way to make him jealous. We can make him jealous by simply not following his instructions. Deuteronomy chapter 4, starting in verse 23. Be careful not to forget the covenant of Yahweh your God, that he made with you. Do not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything Yahweh your God has forbidden. For Yahweh your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. So forgetting Yahweh's covenant makes him jealous. That covenant includes adding to and taking away from his Torah, his instructions, as seen here in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2, and Deuteronomy 12:32. We aren't to add to or take away from the Torah. Not every person, of course, but as a whole, the Jews have added to the Torah by way of their teachings and traditions through the Talmud. And as a whole, the church has taken away from it. Because of what the church believes, it takes away from the Torah. The result? The Jews aren't jealous of the church. Not even close. They hold absolutely no regard for, let alone are jealous of, the belief system of the church. Why? Because they know it's a lifestyle that completely throws out the commands of Yahweh. It's a lifestyle that has no regard for the Torah. To the everyday Jew, the Messiah of the modern church is a lawbreaker. So they have no cause to be jealous of the church. However, let them see an individual who pursues the whole Bible. Let them see an individual who pursues Yeshua in obeying God's law, and you'll get a completely different response. When they see the joy Yeshua brings to that individual as they follow what Yahweh gave, then we will see these verses about jealousy be fulfilled and come alive before our very eyes. This is why we see the words of Paul in Romans chapter 3. For we maintain that a man is justified by faith apart from observing the law. Paul establishes the fact that we're justified through faith. But then he continues, Is God the God of Jews only? Is he not the God of Gentiles too? Yes, of Gentiles too. Since there is only one God, who will justify the circumcised by faith, and the uncircumcised through that same faith, do we then nullify the law by this faith? Not at all. Rather, we uphold the law. Paul knew the Torah is for all to follow, and he knew when the Jews see Gentiles living after the Torah, they would be jealous. Thus, his words in Romans 10 and 11, with referencing Moses and Isaiah. We even see this jealousy taking place in Acts chapter 17. Let's read it. Verse 2 says, "As his custom was, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Christ," he said. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and not a few prominent women. But the Jews were jealous. Let's read that again. But the Jews were jealous. So they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob, and started a riot in the city. They rushed to Jason's house in search of Paul and Silas in order to bring them out to the crowd. Why were the Jews jealous? Because of what we just read in verse 4. A large number of God-fearing Greeks were convinced to start following in the way through Yeshua. Gentiles were convinced to walk in the way through Jesus, Yeshua. And just as we see this jealousy and anger taking place in the first century from the Jews towards Gentile converts, we see it will happen again in the end. We see here in Revelation chapter 12 and 14 where the enemy will go after everyone who obeys the commandments of God, Yahweh, and hold to the testimony of Jesus, Yeshua. And this is why we see the Noahide laws starting to become more visible to those who aren't distracted by the mainstream media. We strongly encourage you to watch our teaching, Beware of the Noahide laws. You see, the enemy doesn't care if you believe in Jesus or if you go to church. However, if you live a life of obedience to the Torah as Yeshua instructed in Matthew 23, that's when you become a target. So only when we pursue Yeshua with a life of obedience to the law will we see the words of Yahweh as given through Moses and the prophets about jealousy and anger coming to pass in the Jews. So, does your faith provoke the Jews to anger and jealousy? Are you living a life that obeys God's commandments and holds to the testimony of Yeshua? Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.